Now that I'm retired. Well, I'm not retired. I mean, I'm writing, and I still, teach a little bit here and there. But it's funny because David, in fact, David was, they were trying to do some film in the classroom, doing a little documentary. Naturally, it failed. But they had incredible charisma, and personality and attractiveness to work with. Yeah. Well, anyway, but what happened was it was doomed. But David asked me, he was interviewing me, and he said, "Okay, you're retiring. Are you going to miss it? Are you going to miss the kids?" And I don't know if you remember this, David, but I said, "Nope." And he said, "You're not going to miss them?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to miss them. Okay? I'm going to have the time of my life. I'm going fishing and stuff like that. I'm going to do things I want to do. I'm not going to have all these crazy nuts ricocheting off the wall, and they're all nuts. Okay? So David was with Bill Berry was with him doing the photography, and Bill said, "Ask him in September." Well, September rolled around, y'all, and I have never been depressed in my life. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm not a little Looney Tunes, okay? The OCD's incredible, but I've never been depressed clinically. Well, I went into a depression that was simply unbelievable. I was tackling people on the streets of my hometown where I retired in Beaufort, South Carolina, and then beating on them and pummeling them and saying, "Hey, if you want to learn anything, I'll teach it to you." Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And I really miss it. And I just want to say to all you guys, I miss you guys incredibly. I really do. I just loved it. It was a wonderful wonderful way to spend your adulthood, because, I don't know, keeps you young, and they were all more mature than me anyway. But I want to say, before I get too much, I think, into the book, I want to tell you what inspired it. I hated school. I was the most peculiar, odd, screwed up little student you have ever seen in your life. And I want to explain how, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about what being smart really means, okay? And how you can get kids that way, and you can become that way yourselves. But it is the antithesis of what we have been taught. We've been taught that rationalism, being reasonable, is the key to intelligence, okay? Now here's the problem. Reason comes from the lack of it. Rationalism comes from irrationality. Creation comes from chaos. Logic from illogic. Roses grow from manure, okay? Now, here's the problem. Educators have always thought that you can transmit what we know from one generation to another. Thus, you have curriculums and you have schools, and learning is very institutionalized. That's not the case, because somebody just doesn't inherit the ability to think or to feel or to love or to appreciate or to be critical. It comes from their personalities, from their experience, from what's inside of them. And this is something that has to be brought out, not something that you can just transmit from one generation to another. So the question that educators have always had is, well, what does the child need to know? And this is what, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, this is what No Child Left Behind is based on, but it's not just No Child Left Behind. It's what Western education is based on, and it's what's been based on since I was a kid, and before that, all right? What do these kids need to know? Let's organize this knowledge. Let's present it to them, okay? You can do that all day. You can do that all night. You can do that for 12 years. You can do it for 16. You can do it for 25. That's not learning. That's information. That's not, these kids and you as adults and we as adults are capable of way more than that. That barely touches our minds. And the question, therefore, for me, upon a kid entering my class, was not, what does he need to know? Is that an important question? Oh, hell yeah. It's really important. You know, they need to have their ears to the tracks, listening to the approach of those great truths coming down the track. I mean, they've got to know what's out there. They've got to be stimulated. But the real question is, who is he? Who is she? Who is this child in front of me? And how can they come out? Intelligence is based on emotion, not reason. Emotion drives the boat. Reason follows in its wake. All right? Now, I'm going to try to show you as much about this as I can. And I'm going to start a little bit by talking about myself when I was a kid in school, okay? Because I know that my students have probably not heard some of these stories. They've heard others that I've made up. These are true. Probably the only thing I said true to them the whole time they were in there. Yeah, well, anyway, so what happens is that I grew up in the low country of South Carolina in Beaufort, that Southern Living just named the #1 town in America. It's beautiful. And it won't be long because Southern Living just named it that, but that's all right. People like David will go, no. And so it was a Jewish family, assimilated. Now, I was very happy. My parents were glorious, wonderful people. I'm sure that I inherited from them that if I was happy, they were happy. You know, if my brothers were happy, they were happy. And I'm sure with my own kids, and certainly without question the kids that I taught, that I had the same feeling. If Meredith was happy, Bernie was happy. If Meredith was unhappy, well, Bernie was going to have a bad day. So he had to really get in there, right? And I'm sure I got that from my parents. And my home life was wonderful. It was... one thing I did notice, around my neighborhood and in my home when I was a little boy, before school started, when people ask you a question, well, it was because they wanted to know the answer. They didn't ask a question to see if you knew the answer. Do you understand the difference? And so I was brought up like this, and this is what it was like in my home. And this is what it's like in my neighborhood and with my friends and with my relatives. So kindergarten started, and back then it wasn't compulsory. And I can remember my mom taking me to kindergarten and dropping me off 3 blocks from my house. And I go into this house, and it's really boring. You got some kids in there, and they look like they all have a pencil and paper, and they're kind of all doing the same stuff, you know. And it's kind of dark and dreary, you know, and the sunlight is kind of just barely fingering its way through the Venetian blinds, so that it's just a dusty look. And I just thought to myself, this is boring. And then the other thing is for some reason, even though my mother had dropped me off, I actually expected her to be there. I don't know why that is. Maybe because she was everywhere. You know, I mean, maybe I just thought she was going to fly in through the window or something. I don't know what it was. I mean, I was a little kid. But she wasn't. And she was a lot of fun. And my brothers weren't there and the kids in the neighborhood. So I just left. You know, and I walked on back home and walked into the house. And I remember Mom didn't look surprised at all. Hey, she was playing with some... I don't know what she's playing with, some doll, my one-armed doll, Susie, who I really liked because she didn't have a head. And you could stick things inside there and bang it up against your leg, you know, and beat it up and stuff. And so what happened was hey, Jim. And so what happens is I go, you know, we start playing. my brothers and all, like nothing's ever happened, and I don't think anything more about it. That was my kindergarten experience. Now, unfortunately, beyond that, of course, there's a compulsory attendance law. So first grade, here I am. Now, first of all, I remember really being surprised, like, these kids actually talk to each other, you know? I mean, they were big. And I remember that we had this reading group. And we were like the bluebirds or the redbirds or whatever, and I was in the first reading group. We were reading a book called The Red Caboose, okay? Well, we get in this little group, and the teacher, well, she says, what color is the caboose? So I said, I was just trying to be helpful. So I said, it's red. See? It says here, it's red. All of the other questions she asked, all of the answers were in the book. Now, I came from a Jewish household. You didn't see in our driveway an Evinrude because Beaufort is surrounded by water. You know, you didn't see boats. There were no rifles in our living room walls. You know, I did love sports, and somehow my parents were delighted, you know. But, you know, at our dinner table, you won the argument if your decibel level was the highest. It wasn't a question of, like, logic or reason. It was if you just overwhelmed them with volume, then you strode off as the winner. And you were on the, you know, you were on the prow of the float, okay? And so, of course, I have to admit, I do want to take some responsibility for myself here as a child. I'm sure that, especially since I was getting frustrated, that probably some of that came out, you know. It's here. It's here. It's right here in the book, okay? Oh, he's right there. It says he's the conductor, okay? Now, I went home that day and I drew a conclusion. My teacher couldn't read. Had I thought about it and had been more informed in the jargon that would come up later, I would have said she had real memory problems, was probably ADD, had difficulties processing information, who knows. But the point is, this is what I thought. And then I thought to myself, well, in retrospect, when I look back on it, I think to myself, all the questions were hers. I didn't care what color the damn caboose was. And I didn't care about this conductor guy. And also, I didn't even care about this book. And I didn't care about her because she didn't make sense. And why do I have a teacher that can't read? I was really raising some Cain about all this, okay? Causing some consternation. And, you know, Mom would say things like, well, I'm sure you'll be able to teach her, Bernard, or be patient with her, son, you know, or, well, there are things that you can't do. Have you gotten to math yet? You know, which was true. I couldn't do math and never could. And now, what were my questions? Well, they're the questions that a lot of little boys and girls have. They're fabulous. They're great questions. What makes the sun shine? Why does the wind blow? What makes it happen? How come if I take a tennis ball or a baseball and I throw it against the brick wall of my house, it comes back, and not only does it come back, it comes back at the same speed? How come when Paul jumps to the third rung of the monkey bars, he gets it, and I fall on my posterior? I'm too little to know that it's because he's a head taller than me. I had brothers. Why do girls sit down to pee? I would have never known it until first grade when the problem of the lid going, up and down. That was a great question. There were a million questions. Why do flowers have colors? If there's a God, why can't we see him? Now, we could go on and on. Every kid has these. I promise you, every small child has these questions, better ones. So here's what I learned. I learned that my questions weren't important, and that if I was going to go, that only the teacher's questions were important, and if mine were going to be considered at all, I'd have to wait 3 weeks and find them in a book or something. So what happened is this. I did what I think, whether people know it or not, I turned off. I dissociated from school, and I daydreamed. Now, did I make pretty good grades? Sure. In reading, writing, I made good grades because that was easy. Hell, like I told you, it's all right there. You don't even have to listen. The teacher asked the same question 15 times. You don't have to pay attention all the time. I learned to just tune in, at the right time. I did poorly in math because I'm an idiot in math. That's why. That's all. Had nothing to do with school. It had to do with me and what I was going to do or not do, and I was totally disinterested. So I wanted to give, then I'm going to go farther than this too. Then what happens is you're dissociated in school. You go through the motions. You played the game. We didn't have No Child Left Behind, but we had the test. We knew what we had to do to get into college. I was so bored it was unbelievable. Now, it did help me become really funny because the boredom would come out during class. And I was a real wit. I was constantly, by the time I was in junior high, following my teachers around, begging them not to call my mother, okay? But my mother didn't think much of school either. She thought it was boring. She walked in one day, looked around, and said, under her breath, I could hear her, well, not much happening here. Then she went back to playing the piano. Now, when I got to be a teenager, something happened. They had these literature books, and also they introduced paperbacks. This was the, late 50s, 59, 60, something like this. Now, of course, they're all over the place. But they had this rack of paperbacks in the room, and it made it look like you were writing a story, which really helped. And I loved them. Oh, my God. I fell in love. Something happened to me where I surrendered to them. And this is what learning is. It's not conquering something. It's surrendering. It's not a violation of subject matter or a poem or a story. It's giving yourself up to it. It's more like an orgasm, if you will, metaphorically, than it is, conquest, machoism. And I would give myself up to Charlotte Bronte, to Jane Eyre, to Wuthering Heights, to A Portrait of Ginny by Robert Nathan. Even the stories in the textbook, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, my God, that was me. Did I like Beowulf? Of course not. So I didn't read it and flunked that essay. Who cared? Now, here's the point. I would go home, and my mom started to get worried that back then they averaged out your intelligence. I was average because I was pretty good in language and real bad in math and science. History was just a bore because of the way it was taught. I didn't know until I got out of school that history was interesting, until I learned it on my own. So she was really worried that I was not going to get into college. She was right to be worried about it. So she would say, just get this math grade up. I've got you a tutor who would, of course, at my very approach, flee out of the back of her house and jump into her car and leave. My mother would have to call it because I was so stupid, she said, which I was. And that, let me tell you, it did not bother me to hear that. It was a relief. Because this way, otherwise, it's like some physically handicapped kid, at the starting block, and he's got no legs. And you're saying, run, 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 you can get there. Well, the fact is, I could have run and run and run, and either I was dumb or the way it was taught or both. That combination wasn't working, and I wasn't going to get there. So when Miss Harvey told me that I was a dumbass, I said, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I understand it now. This is hard. And I really do believe that's important. I think we're all stupid. I think we're stupid I'm stupid even in English. Everybody's dumb. That's our motivation for learning. Ignorance is our only real motivation for learning. So as long as we walk around thinking really well of ourselves, you can kiss learning goodbye. Humility is the source of learning. And curiosity, the source of inspiration, and need, the source of inspiration. Those things you can't measure on these little dinky-ass tests. Okay? Now, so what happens is you would think, well, with the reading and with the language and, all this that I'm now involved in, I would feel great about myself. Certainly make good grades in English. No. I had learned that school was boring. For 9 years, I had learned it was drudgery. It was too late. And so, you know how I really felt after reading and getting involved in those books and spending all that time at night? I felt guilty. Like you do after you first start masturbating and you don't want your mom to see, the evidence. You felt just like that. And I say it seriously. I felt just like that. I didn't want to get caught, and yet nobody was out looking for me. It was that paranoid because I knew I should be doing math or science or history or something boring because that's what school was, and if I didn't, I wasn't going to get into college. And I forgot those questions. Those early questions, they didn't exist for me anymore. And what were my questions that I didn't even know I had when I got to be a teenager? They're what everybody else's questions were too. They jostle for attention inside every one of them, inside every one of us. They're the great themes of literature and history. They're fabulous. Unrequited love, what we used to call puppy love. Sexuality to a first kiss for a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid done with the wrong person for the wrong reasons is the same thing as sexual intercourse for a 23-year-old kid done with the wrong person for the wrong reasons. The guilt, the shame, and the anxiety are still there. Friendship and betrayal. Who among us has not ever bullied or let me lighten it up a bit, picked on somebody else or been picked on? And by picked on, what do I mean? I don't mean just physically. How about the kid who is always asking you your grade only so that she can reveal hers, which is always higher? How about the kid who you're getting out there on the court and you're trying to get up the nerve to take that last jump shot of the game, to win the game on the playground? And then this other kid says, well, here, pass, I don't know. And then when confronted, the critic says, oh, I was just trying to be helpful. Constructive criticism. The put-downs of the virtuoso, the liberal's handgun, if you will, for teenagers in America. The Holden Caulfield, of course, was the master of them. And what are the other questions you have? Look at other themes going on. Failures of ambition. For an adult, they seem bigger, but for a child, not getting the part in the school play, getting picked last, not making the team, getting a bad grade. These are all stories. We're not even talking about abuse or abandonment and neglect. How about the homophobic 13-year-old who who's brilliant in math, a whiz, and he hurls his slide rule and calculator to the winds, okay, in order to go play football when he's terrible at it and has absolutely no interest in it, and spends his recess calling all the football players fags. That's an issue. He's living the wrong life, not the life he needs and wants to live. That has to be confronted. I don't mean in your face confrontation necessarily by any means, but he has to become aware of this, of what he's doing to himself. The kid who dresses with, these girls dress terrible nowadays anyway, with the skimpy stuff and you know what I'm talking about, midriff is showing, okay? Now, she's overweight. Why is she doing it? To deny that she's overweight. And she doesn't know it. The kid who is dressing skimpy and who's going to tell you, oh, Bernie, it's because I'm proud of my new body. Oh, God, give me a break. Children's rights. No, it's never that. 99% of the time, it's because of an absent father. Either emotionally or physically, that father is not there enough. Now, here's the problem. Once the child knows this, if once the father realizes it, if the father, and she doesn't want me to stop her, she does, because I'm the surrogate parent. She wants her father to stop her. And here's the problem. If I just call up the father and say whatever, when the father stops her, what's she going to do? You think she's going to say, okay? By this time, she's thoroughly mad. What causes her to do this? When did it start? It starts early. Let's look at a 5-year-old. Let's look at this. There is one of my favorite students of all time, and she was brilliant, a wonderful writer, great reader, great kid, fun, but her writing, creative writing on stories, she could never get to her story. It could not fully make sense. Now, why? Because she had not accepted the full irrationality of the story, the feeling that she needed, okay? Now, what happened and this has happened to a million kids I've taught, they've had loss at an early age, the death of a beloved pet. Death is an issue. The death of a grandparent, for example. The loss of a best friend who moved when they're 5 and it's the first one. Sibling rivalry, hell hath no fury, like an older sibling spurned. It's a loss. That's a rejection. I mean, when that new kid is born, if I'm 3 and I've had all the attention to myself, suddenly my stories are being read to this little thing that can only burp and pass gas and break wind and doo-doo in his pants and cry. He's not interesting. He's not interesting like I am. The songs that were sung to me at night, Mom's cooing over this little thing. And when he gets older, it doesn't get any better. I'm playing out catch with my dad, and this little thing comes out, wants to play. Well, here's how all that comes out later. It comes out with reading, it comes out with writing, and it comes out in their relationships. The kid's father does not know why the kid always makes excuses when he asks him to go camping with him now. The kid doesn't know why either. The kid will miss a great line of literature. In a day no pigs would die. It's a little hokey, but it's good. There's a scene where, God, never mind. Let me see if I can shorten this a bit. There's a scene where, it's during the Depression in Vermont. The father is austere, forbidding, illiterate, and really wants an education for his kid. They're poor. The kid runs away from school because the other kids make fun of his clothes. He ends up pulling the goiter out of a cow and saving the cow's life. It's a wealthy neighbor's cow in the woods next door to his house, to their farm. In addition, the cow burst 2 calves. They find the boy passed out. We next see the boy in his bedroom, okay? But he's passed out because the cow, when he reached for the goiter, it was inside the cow's throat. He pulls it out. The cow clamps down on his arm. The boy passes out, okay? Now, we see him upstairs in his bedroom. So Dad, who, he's pretty scary. He's got a stick of sumac in his hand. The boy wakes up. And he says, "Gosh, Daddy, what's that?" And he says, "Well, son, that's going to be a whistle." He's carving. He's whittling. And the boy says, "Wow, that's going to be a fine whistle, Daddy." And his daddy says, "Son, let me ask you something. With a whistle as fine as this, you reckon a little boy might have a mind not to skip school again?" That kid who is mad at his daddy and no longer even knows it, in the same way that I no longer knew what my questions were when I was younger, will miss that line. He will not see it. He will miss it because he's jealous of the relationship of this little boy and his daddy. What does it mean that he misses it? Oh, nothing much. Just that he's missing out on tenderness, love, all those things that make life marvelous, rich. Because what it also means is the relationship that he has with his dad might well have to do with the relationship he has with his friends. Which is why every time he writes a story about Jim, instead of who he adores, instead of talking about how great Jim is and the problem between them, he ridicules Jim and puts him down. All he does is wave his hand in class like a flag and suck up to the teacher and blah, blah, blah. Okay? He's putting him down. He's creating distance. He can't be close to people because he's been hurt. Why was he hurt? Sibling rivalry. He had a little brother born. The problem is nobody really dealt with it. The problem is schools haven't done anything with it. The little girl I was telling you about who was so terrific, what made her writing otherwise beautiful, on story, a little giddy, a little flat, a little melodramatic? What made her not be able to really get to her story that she was writing? Finally, she told us. Do you know what she said? Because, and I will tell you how it came out. It came out in Catcher in the Rye. She hated Catcher in the Rye. And she was very smart. She said, "Bernie, there's no plot." Well, there isn't much of one. He's so cynical. All he does is put people down. He courts people who he can't be friends with and ignores those he can be friends with, which incidentally describes to one degree everybody in middle school by that time. That's what popularity is about. Popularity is the child's brand name t-shirt is the adult's Mercedes, a car in the right neighborhood, or the house in the right neighborhood. Okay? Popularity means well feared. It has never meant well liked. And the kids who are popular are so scared of each other. They don't know what to do. That's why they listen to the same music. That's why they wear the same clothes. That's why they're clones of each other. The kids who are unpopular know better. They do the same thing. They're all elbowing their way in there because they're scared because they've been hurt. They're scared of loving. So, this kid then says, well, I say to this kid, why? Why do you feel this way about him? Okay, admittedly, you're right, but why are you so angry? I never see you angry. Usually not a hair's ever out of place. You make straight A's. Your scores are in the statistical stratosphere. You're going to Harvard, probably. You know? Both parents are together. Everything's great. Which is what she presented. Okay? Now, she said, he's afraid to love. That's why. And she's a beautiful girl, a little tear. She was having trouble with her best friend at the time, whose name was Marcy, who is also here, but it's not the same Marcy. And Marcy was totally different than her. Marcy was wild and artistic, not that both of them, not that Laura wasn't either. But you never knew what color her hair was going to be. She had a million learning disabilities. She was ADD. Every hair was always out of place, but she was brilliant creatively, dramatically, artistically, writing, creative writing. She was like me in the sense that I can do the poetry, I could do the stories, I could do the personal essays. I've never been able to write a research paper in my life. I have never been able to do a footnote, okay? So when I talk to you about intelligence, notice where it's coming from. It's a very complicated thing. Does this mean I'm stupid? Absolutely. Okay? Does it mean that I've also got some talents? Of course. All of us. That's the way all of us are. Now, he's afraid to love. Oh, well then, why do you seem so upset? Now, what had been going on is she had kind of been putting down Marcy a little bit because Marcy had been putting down her. Marcy's parents had just gotten divorced. Laura's parents were now doing everything. Laura's mother was taking them to the rehearsals and taking them to ballet, and Marcy's mother was filling out job applications, was frankly depressed, and Marcy was jealous, and so she would say to Laura, she would call her family dinners at which Marcy was being fed, incidentally, cleaver time, stuff like this. So Laura began things like, well, she was dancing awfully close to so-and-so at the junior high dance the other night. Rather slutty behavior, this kind of thing. All right, now, so what happens is Laura says, because I'm afraid to love. Marcy completely changes her whole attitude toward Laura and adores her, looks at her with adoration, because Laura has expressed a universal dilemma. Everybody is. And everybody is because of those same reasons we're talking about. What we started with, and we're not talking about abuse and abandonment and neglect. That's a quarter of the kids. That's horrible, and that affects everybody. We're talking about those normal traumas that you go through, that everybody goes through. And they're not all bad if you deal with them. Sibling rivalry teaches you to share, thank God. It's not like they're all terrible. It's just that they have to be dealt with wisdom. Now, so what happens is, I said, what's your story? And I'm going to give you the first line of her story. Here's what she said. For hours, I would brush her hair. She was talking about her grandmother. She's the girl a few minutes ago who I told you about, who lost her grandmother. Her grandmother was fabulous, regal, beautiful white hair. They would spend a lot of time together. They'd play cards. They'd write poetry together by the fireplace and light candles. Her grandmother would make character cookies for her. And her parents told her that her grandmother had gotten cancer. And she loved her grandmother and admired her more than anybody in the world. And told her she'd gotten cancer. And so she said, she didn't want to believe that. She's just a kid. She's a little girl. She didn't know what it is. So she has presents and poems and drawings. And the little girl goes into the hospital room, and she's thrilled to see her, and she sees that her grandmother is bald. And she can't take it. And she runs out. And her parents try to get her to visit. But, she can't do that. She's too little. She can't handle it. She couldn't cry at her grandmother's funeral. And this is something I hear from kids in the middle school a lot. Unable to cry at their grandparents' funeral. They think, this is how tragic this is, they think it's because they don't really love them enough. They have no idea it's because they loved them so much that they couldn't handle it, that it hurts so badly. So her story began with this line. For hours, I would brush her hair. And I tell you what I'm going to do. Well, I think because of time, I won't read you part of that. But my point is where'd that line come from? It's beautiful. Where'd it come from? It comes from inside. All of these great themes that are in these kids, loss, love, family, identity issues, cultural issues that they come with, they're all inside them. They're inside all of us. They are dying to come out. But we're little and we push them away. When we push them away, we push away the open, eager child that we were when we came into this world. That's why parents often say to themselves, what happened to that kid, you know? He was so interested in everything. When they go back and deal with it through reading and writing, through talking, through poetry or drama or what have you, they re-experience, yes, the pain of that loss, but they also connect back around the corner to the eager, joyous, innocent child they once were. That child also comes out. So you have the open, eager child that was there, only now tempered with judiciousness and wisdom. They're not going to trust anybody. They're not going to open their arms to a tornado. But they can love and they can appreciate. And they won't miss the line in a day no pigs would die. Son, you reckon a kid with a whistle as fine as this might have a mind not to skip school? When they read Catcher in the Rye, they won't close it and say it's boring or it's plotless, because the mirror is such a reflection of them that they have to shy away from it. Instead, they may realize that they're friends with the wrong people, or that the friendships that they have are not as fruitful and real as they could be. And instead say, well, who do I want to be friends with? How can we do better here? Do I need to take a drink or smoke a joint to impress him when, frankly, if it really comes out, he's as scared of doing it as I am? We're both living the wrong lives. The homophobic kid can go back to his math and love who he wants to. I want to show you briefly, and then I'm going to take questions. What all this writing demonstrates all this stuff. That's why I think it's important, because you can see it. And I want to show you what I mean by what's there. And I want to use two paragraphs that two kids have written, very briefly, to demonstrate what everything that I've been talking about, that intelligence we know nothing about hardly, that it's much more common sense than it is academic, that it's very uneven, very subtle, very complicated, and it can't be measured quantitatively. And reducing these kids to numbers is a crime against, I think, children. I think it's a crime against humanity. It is awful, because here's why. It's awful for the kids who do well on those tests. They're under the illusion that they're a lot smarter than they are. I had a kid at a creative writing and literature symposium at North Fulton, 15, 20 years ago, charming kid named Yuri. And I got through, and he raised his hand from the back of the auditorium. He says, Mr. Schein, can you expound on the distinguished, prominent nature of Southern literature pre-Margaret Mitchell? Well, it's like Holden says, you got to step back and give a guy room to answer a question. I didn't know. So, but I was thinking, what kid has that question? So I said, that's very interesting. Are you really interested in the answer to that question? Why, no, of course not, he said. And I said, oh, you're not? Well, no. So I said, well, he was very trying smiling. So I said, well, then I need to tell you, it's dumb, because it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's like saying explain the universe. It's just has nothing to do with you if you're not interested in it. So I said, where'd you get it? And then, of course, I realized he had outsmarted me, the teacher, and himself. He said, from my teacher. Where was his teacher? Sitting right next to him. I've never been more humiliated in my life, okay? Now, so I'm sitting there thinking, hello, you all. So I'd like to kill you. But so I said, well, Yuri, you have outsmarted your teacher, you have outsmarted me, but you've also outsmarted yourself because you're under the illusion. This is a group of gifted kids. You're under the illusion that because you have high test scores, you make great grades, and you're going to Duke or Yale or whatever, elite schools, that you're really brilliant. And you don't even know what your questions are. You're fodder for any charlatan's imagination. It makes me think of McNamara in Vietnam, that whiz technocrat with no moral rudder. Or maybe even, I don't know, Rumsfeld perhaps in this Iraqi war. But the point is, now, having said that, if I can just find this dang thing. Here it is. Both of these have to do with parents, one parent at least who is not there. And I do it because I want to make it short and let you see both sides. You don't have to have a major trauma. These kids have enough stories, every one of them, to fill up a bookshelf, okay? Just normal things. Especially things like popularity. Oh, well, we were best friends, Bernie. Oh, what happened? How come you're not now? We drifted apart. That usually means one betrayed the other for status, for social status. Left him in the ditch. Now, everybody does it. You know, it's not like, you know, the kid who left is any better or worse off than the kid who he left. The other one's probably playing the victim about it, you know, making him feel guilty, trying to get his attention. And he's probably snubbing 4 kids over on the other corner who are dying to be friends with him because he could feel safe with them, like Holden. When kids go for this popularity, it's because they know they're going to be rejected, and therefore it doesn't hurt. All right. Now, Betsy was very cut off from her father, okay? And he had left, and she couldn't remember anything good about him at all. She just hated him, that's all, okay? Now, she got to the point where she realized that she was feeling the pain of his leaving, okay? And here is then when she felt the pain of his leaving, she could go back and remember what it was like to love him, to need him, and to get that back in return, which of course he was dying for. He just couldn't overcome her rejection of him after he left. Now, I was very little then. My family was very happy. This is when they were all together. And because I was oldest, I was known as the big girl. I loved that. When friends of my parents visited, my father and mother would pat me on the head and say, "This is Betsy. She's the big girl in the family." And because I was the big girl on Sunday mornings when my parents slept late, well, I'd get to go into their bedroom, chat with them while they had coffee in bed, and read the newspaper. One Sunday morning, I walked into their bedroom, and it was really funny. They were laughing, they were screaming, they were giggling. It looked like they were wrestling or tickling, you know, like they do to me when we were playing. But then when I opened the door and they saw me standing there, they looked shocked. I mean, shocked. Their faces were red as tomatoes. Covers and sheets went flying everywhere. They pulled them up. They just looked so frantic. And my father, he kept reaching uncomfortably under the covers for something. Well, then they just lay there. They just lay there. Their heads propped against the pillows with these silly smiles on their faces, looking at me, just grinning. What were they smiling about? I knew. They were happy to see me. Do me a favor. Compare that. This is a normal kid. All kids are bright, and all kids are talented, and all kids are dumber than hell because they can all feel and think, and because all of them are also ignorant like the rest of us. But they're all smart and talented because they all feel and think. That's all it takes. The truth does liberate. Look at the language here. Look at the irony expressed in that last line. This girl was 12. Okay? And this is nothing big. Now look, Here's one, Kathleen Rabinowitz. Her parents are divorced, and she's beginning to see mom as mom and dad as dad. Yeah, I know. Mom is mom and dad is dad. All right? Now, she says, Dad started she started thinking something like, Mom makes me eat one piece of lettuce at dinner, and Dad makes me say, excuse me, when I leave the table, at his house. She's seen them separate. All right? Now, the symbol of the reformer family life was the vegetable garden. And when they were all together on Sundays, they'd pick vegetables and cook a giant pot of spaghetti and throw it in, blah, blah. It was the garden. One day I was walking up the walkway trying to avoid the cracks, and I saw a bright green weed twisting its way around a tomato plant. I almost started to cry on that sun-filled day, but instead I didn't. I walked quietly over to the garden, yanked the weed out of the ground, blaming it for the divorce, remembering how the garden used to be weed-free. Days went by, and every time I looked at the garden, there were more and more weeds. Finally, the whole garden, watch this, was only a mass of retired tomato plants and sad cucumbers. It was then I actually realized that Mom and Dad were never going to be together, that our family was never going to be the way it used to be. Years passed, and the weeds took over our yard. Mom hired a few guys to fix it up. Just a few days ago, they planted grass over the old vegetable garden, over my mom and dad. Retired tomato plants and sad cucumbers. When I tell you that roses grow from manure, that rationality and reason comes from irrationality and the lack of reason. What we have to do when we have children is deal with the mess that's in front of us. It's a glorious mess. It's fabulous. Beauty comes from that. They're adorable. So again, the question would not be so much what does the child need to know, but rather who is he and how can he come out? And No Child Left Behind, all these tests, all these silly little IQ and achievement tests, they're just dumb. They don't show anything. These kids are much smarter, much braver, much more loving, and much more beautiful than any of those tests, than the conventional lens, frankly, suggest. They're just much, much more. Questions? That was a long time ago. And they were. And you frankly, in that situation, and I know the scene you're talking about, to have said your attire is inappropriate would have been like, trying to kill an elephant with a pea shooter. You just had to get down there where they were then. But no, I could not get away with it now. And I'm surprised I did it then. Oh, I know what it was. I knew the parents. You see, I had a very close relationship with most of these parents. They liked me, I liked them. We adored each other, frankly. And I was talking to this parent about this kid, which makes a difference. So therefore, a lot of things aren't, he was grateful, you see, because of what was happening. He was worried. And when the kid starts to button up, gets closer to him, then of course he feels good about it. They understood what was happening there. But look, if your message is, first of all, Paul probably regrets the hell out of the fact that we made this. See, when I went into teaching, I came from a job that was kind of supervisory in the state of North Carolina, and it paid more money, a lot more money, but it was boring and I wasn't any good. And people knew I didn't know what I was talking about who'd been teaching for a long time. And so, I knew that if I was going to have any fun doing this, that I'd have to go back into the classroom because adults were really boring. Okay, that's really what it amounted to. And so what happened is the agreement with Paul was that I could do whatever I wanted. Well, of course, this was, this was 36 years ago. 60s almost, early 70s. So Paul said, sure, it's middle school. Nobody knows what the hell to do there anyway. Anything you do is going to be better than anything else. So see, that was the attitude. Now, if you ask Paul, look, was I really, of course, notice where he put his kids, all three of them. But if you ask him, was Bernie a pain in the ass? Well, Paul's a pretty honest man. But no, you couldn't. And look, it's even worse. It used to be that if a kid said they were being abused, you knew that it was probably true. Because if it's hard for it to come out, if it was shameful, if you had to pry it open out like a crowbar. Now, I read a story in Texas, a teacher throws a kid is talking, a senior is talking in biology class loud over a cell phone. The kid tells her to put the damn thing up. She didn't even say damn. The kid goes home and gets her mother on her side and accuses her of abuse. Now, most of the time now, look, 25 to 30% of these kids are abused seriously, or abandoned seriously. It is a huge problem. But the fact of the matter is, when a kid starts wailing about, "My mommy abused me," you can bet your ass she's abusing her mom. You see what I mean? And so you've also got that to deal with. Frankly, I don't know of a school I could go in and teach right now, man. I mean, it's that bad. It's awful out there. The prospects of everything from the parents who feel guilty, who are going to scapegoat you. If somebody said to me, "Should you go in and teach school right now?" I'd say first, organize, raise hell, get rid of some of these people. Also, you got these policymakers, administrators, who don't teach, who don't know kids, who are doing all this testing, putting all this money into this testing. I couldn't believe it where a superintendent asked me on a radio program the other day, "Well, what would you do as an alternative?" I said, "To the testing?" And he said, "Yeah, I would do the obvious. If I want to know if a kid can write, I'll have him write. If I want to know if he can read, I'll have him read. I'm not a math teacher, but I can certainly tell if he can do math without a test. And don't tell me that a multiple choice test is going to tell me anything. I know better." Identifying the problem in any academic, intellectual kind of thing is always the hardest issue. What's the question is the hardest thing. Look, my irrigation system can go bad on my backyard, in my lawn. Okay? Well, finding out what the problem is takes me a lot longer than it does to go to Lowe's and get a clamp once I figure it out. John Irving?
John Irving.
You mean Garp and Widow for 1 year? Yeah. Oh, I think it's not that I have the expertise. I think The World According to Garp is just a classic, great American novel because it's truly him. It's his voice. And the voice is really different and interesting. There is a scene that breaks my heart. Of course, every time, if it's a child that gets hurt, you can't help it. But it's fabulous. It shows us a different way to live. It's funny. It opens your mind. Obama, I love Obama. I think he's as smart as he can be. He knows what he doesn't know. And that's what makes him, I think, so intelligent. I am very disturbed about who he picked for Secretary of Education, for Commissioner of Education. That guy looks like a great guy and a fun guy, but he ain't been in a room with kids. He doesn't know them. He's talking about measuring, if we can get them right on the test, they'll be smart and get those scores up. Y'all, when you think about it, what kind of logic is it behind a program that says, okay, our kids are behind. Let's just give them some more tests. That'll make them smarter. Yeah, I'll do it. I'm telling you, nobody is dumber than educators. Okay? The edifice crumbles, the system goes awry, and you find 2 or 3 on the 3rd floor working with a loose board. That's what happens. It is incredibly small-minded. Just like probably every other profession. Nobody's better to me than teachers. I think teachers are the most wonderful people just in the whole world. But they're prisoners of a system just like the kids are to a large degree. And it makes it very difficult for them. And believe me, I think they're heroes. Yeah.
I just stopped teaching after about, something like 25 to 30 years. I just really quit rather than retire.
You went into a sanitarium? No.
But I used to teach in Maryland in Montgomery County, and every time a teacher would retire, I'd always ask them the same question. How many more years have you taught than you really wanted to teach? And every single one of them, without exception, they never, within a nanosecond, they had a year number. Okay, not one of them is like, 3 more years.
Yeah.
You knew that somehow they kind of like were eking it out because they had invested X amount and they just couldn't. Not one of them ever said, well, I'm prepared to, I would teach longer, except, whatever, I'm older. Always, it's so sad because I'm from public school teaching, and I mean, talk about having your hands tied behind.
Oh, it's awful.
It is so depressing. So you do the best you can, you're as irreverent as you can.
Right.
You close your door
And you hope that a kid, because you gave him a bad grade, doesn't go home and without even realizing what he's doing, lob a grenade at family dinner, blame you for the grade, and have the parents coming after you. And principals are the most spineless people in the whole world. They have to be. That's how they get the jobs, just like superintendents. And so what you got is, you're not going to get back up most of the time. The only time you're going to get it, most of the time, is when you don't need it. That's how you know who your friends are. And who your friends are probably your kids, by and large, your parents, certainly, by and large, and some colleagues. And if you're really good, you got to worry about your colleagues, some of them. Right? Anybody else? Sure. No, go either one.
Looks like the essence, I'm trying to get the essence of this whole wonderful talk.
Thank you.
We're trying to bring out the true attitude of the individual child,
Right.
which we want to do on a mass level.
I'm sorry?
We want to do on a mass level.
Oh, okay.
Because what we have now is not working.
Right.
So, but Mr. Fuller said, you have a question, you must have an answer to the question, or don't ask the question. So, you're asking the question, how do we get the aptitude out of these children and make them bring it out, and who they really are? And that can change the individual and change the world.
Right.
How do you do it?
You say to the kids, essentially, what is it that you don't want anyone to know? What is it that you don't want to tell me? What is your biggest secret? And if you want to be a great reader, a great writer, great in our class government and court system, because laws are the underside of fears. Don't talk to me about, I want a law about marring school property when, you're getting your butt put down all over the place by Jim. You see what I mean, right? Have a law against put downs. In other words, you've got to get to the real thing. And so the kid who's the perennial social victim, you learn it from everything I learned, everything I got from the kids. Everything I learned, I got from them. Okay? I learned from Jim Shropshire right here, who's a great teacher. And Jim, I don't think you'll mind me saying this. Jim learned to read. Jim's brilliant. Jim learned to read in the 5th grade. Okay? He learned to read in the 5th grade. Now watch this. I got him in my 7th grade literature class. He was in my class. And I knew that he had learning disabilities, was ADD, because we never listened to each other. I'm ADD too. And that worked great. Don't you think, Jim? We got a lot out of each other that way. And no harm done there. Well, anyway, so what happened is by the 7th grade, he was the most incredible, he was the smartest kid in the literature class. He was incredible. Just unbelievable. Can I tell them who you are in the book or not? Lanny Butler. You will see his story, the whole story in here, and his name is Lanny Butler, and you will see his whole background. You will see him in my literature class reading Lord of the Flies. You will see how above every other kid, when Simon says, maybe the beast is us, Jim is the only child in the class capable of taking that line in. It's too scary. And it's too scary because the kids have been so mean to each other socially or at home with their siblings. And Jim says, what makes Simon a prophet and what makes him good is that he knows the beast is inside him so he can see. Now, I'm hearing this kid and I'm thinking, God, I thought, he had all these damn things wrong with him. Do you know what I mean? So then it goes on all year. Finally, I break down and I just can't believe this. And so this is incredible. So then I go, I think I'm going to just check his achievement test scores, which I never do, just to see what, if they show anything. Sure enough, 99th percentile, top 1% in the country. And those scores didn't begin to show how bright this kid was. And so I think his story, of course, is about his early learning disabilities, the problems it caused him socially, the self-esteem dilemmas. But what does he do? Well, the little son of a bitch writes about it, and he writes about it great when you read the story. My editor thought there's some kid stories in the book. Most of it is not the kid stories, but there are a few sprinkled in there, My editor thought his was the best in the book. And he wrote about it. He talked about it. He addressed it. He became a teacher because of it. And when I tried to recruit him to Paideia, you know what he told me? I'm not needed there. Give him a big hand. Oh, I'm sorry. One question. He had his hand up a minute ago. Yeah. Well, it's also because you're a psychologist too, I think you'll appreciate this. Just take that one line. I mean, he had a million lines, but that one line I was just giving you for brevity, maybe the beast is us, inside us. Once you know that, you can become better, right? You become a better person. It's when you don't know it, when you're in denial about it. I mean, Hitler thought he was doing the right thing, So, yes, I'm sorry.
Besides Get Out Now.
I'm sorry?
Besides Get Out Now, what advice would you give to a young teacher?
I like it. I think that, within the confines of where you are, it's tough. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I would use the curriculum. The curriculum isn't bad most of the time, okay? The materials, the stories. Remember, I loved them when I was a kid. And what I would do is just remember, first of all, you've got to really know what you're teaching. If you're teaching a literature book, then you've got to know it. And you've got to read it and reread it. And you have to if you're doing a chapter before a class, for example, reread that chapter so it's fresh for you. Then you can go in and be open because you're confident and you have knowledge. All right, now that's the part where the outside world comes in. But at the same time, you want to listen. See? In other words, what is it they're missing? What doesn't make sense? Why doesn't it make sense? And if you can realize that the reason it doesn't make sense is emotional, it's an emotional dilemma, not a rational dilemma. Believe me, a lot of things will take care of themselves after that. The stories will write themselves largely. Remember that when you teach writing, it's not about writing. A person doesn't learn to write to write. A person learns to write to achieve wisdom, understanding. So writing is rewriting. Reading is listening. The advantage is you get to read it again. You get to re-listen. And remember, if you're reading a book, it does you no good if you can't read the room. That's why I gave you that story about the people. That's why I gave you the story about Laura Day and Tessa Monroe. Who's afraid to love? You see? And afterwards, the relationship, you know what Tessa Monroe told Laura Day after her grandmother's story, For Hours I Brushed Her Hair, after she said she was afraid to love? And after her story, Laura Day, who had put down this girl just mercilessly, looked at her and said, my God, you're so human. That's what we're trying to get to. And you don't get to that by ignoring. And remember, to ignore is an active verb. Ignorance is not just something sitting there. The knowledge is inside us. And so a lot of it's inside us. It has to be brought out. I would think more about how do you bring them out rather than, just stuffing them full of stuff. And they can't do that without, material and interaction, but it comes as much for, look, I'll give you another example. You're in a literature class. Let's say I got Elizabeth and Meredith, okay? And Elizabeth and Meredith are in literature class. And Elizabeth gets a higher grade, all right? Or she's doing better. And it's generally recognized. And we go through and we talked about who's doing better and why, what you need to do, what you're not seeing, what are you scared of would be the question, okay? Now, Meredith raises her hand and says, well, she gets asked the easiest questions. Or, what's a good one? Or, well, if she weren't so aggressive, maybe I'd have a chance to say more. And other people might too, okay? All right. Do you let that go? That's literature. That's literature. Meredith is blaming. As long as she blames, she will never get better. Now watch this. What if Elizabeth just takes it and it hurts her feelings? Well, then she's going to do worse. So two people are involved here. So here's what I want to know. Only one thing. How do you feel now? How do you feel now? Is there anything you want to say to each other? How do you feel about blaming her? Did you blame her? Why? It's like in class again. Why? Where did it come from? Who else have you blamed? Okay? Do you see what I mean? When did it start? And we go all the way back to 3, 4, 5 years old. When things start. And also, remember, if you're uncomfortable, they're wrong. That's how much more wisdom you've got than they do. Okay? Be skeptical. I mean, most of what they say, by the time they're in middle school, they're dumb and crazy. Most of what they say is simply not true. Most of what they say, most of what they do is defensive. Okay? So the kid that greets you at your car every morning, to carry your books, you can bet your bottom dollar he ain't got his homework. You see what I mean? I mean, the one who, look at everybody. And everybody has weaknesses, and and these kids are dying to know what these are. They love talking about it. They love talking about themselves. And they love it that it can branch and expand into something bigger than them. A classroom community, for example. Does that help? Oh, thank you. Anybody? Sure.
Your hope for our public school system, in your opinion?
I think the public schools are as good as most private schools. Absolutely. I think, I don't think I'm not talking about any good school here today. The only thing I'm talking about is my classroom and a few of the teachers that I've worked with at Paideia. And I think a lot of those teachers are great. But if you said, I'm not here to advertise a particular school, I don't think Westminster or any of these places, I think a public school might even be the best bet, honestly. I don't think private schools necessarily have it over public school. They have kids that have culturally often, can do these tests, can go through those motions. But if, no. I mean, I think that, yeah, absolutely. As much as anywhere else. Anybody? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.